Good evening, everybody. I'm sports psychologist Dr. Andrew Jacobs. Welcome to our show here. I'm going to make a little announcement as I start. Today is the beginning of my 44th year of work as a sports psychologist. So I am very honored to be doing this show and excited to continue my work over the next decade or so. Hopefully, I'll be turning 70 this year. So my goal is to do this till at least I'm 80. And we'll see if I'm still alive then. But anyway, my goal is to do that. But starting my 44th year of work, I've been privileged to work with every level of sports, from youth sports, high school, collegiate, professional, and the Olympic team. One of the first sports psychologists with our Olympic team back in 1984, 40 years ago, with the cycling team. I've worked with the Kansas City Royals, the Kansas City Current, the NWSL, our indoor soccer team here, the Kansas City Comets. I was the first sports psychologist at the University of Kansas. I've been on the air now for 33 years, and we're doing this show, podcasting now, to talk about sports psychology with a whole wide array of people. Tonight, we're privileged to have Dr. Matt Monaco on with us, or Monaco, depending on how we want to say his last name, because it goes both ways. But Matt, thanks for joining us. He's a sports psychology expert working at a Division I school, and we're going to talk about mental health and college athletes today, because that's what he really works with. So, Matt, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me. Really excited for the conversation, Doc. Appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. Tell us a little bit how you got into this field, because, I always find it interesting. When I started, we set up basically the first sports psychology internship at San Diego State in 1980-81. And so things have exploded since then. I was showing someone in my office the other day. I have my doctoral dissertation in there, which I did on the personality characteristics of jockeys, because my family's in horse racing. My cousin Patrice owned a firm who won the Triple Crown in 1978. And her father, my uncle Hirsch Jacobs, was the winningest trainer in horse racing history. So I had accessibility to all these jockeys. Yeah, I know. But on my literature research on sports psychology, and this is 1979 to 81, it's about 20 pages in my dissertation. That was it. That's all that existed. So obviously it's a little bit different now. So tell us about what you're doing. Tell us about how you got into this, and let's talk tonight.
Yeah, just a little bit different now. The field's really exploded like the last 15 years or so. But for me, look, grew up as an athlete, taught track and field, cross country, and then I played rugby actually in high school and college before my own body told me, like, look, Matt, you got to stop now. And I hung up the cleats at that point. I actually thought I was going to be a lawyer at first, funny enough, but I was interested in changing careers at the end of I went to Sacred Heart University for my undergrad. So decided, like, this is not really finding law my interest for me. I was already an athlete, so interest in sport, big football fan too. Like, I started becoming interested in the brain and how the brain of people's behavior affects their thoughts and vice versa, how their experiences affect what's going on with them brain-wise. So I wanted to learn more about that. I already was really interested as an athlete, athletic identity myself. Okay, how do we combine this interest in psychology with with my sport background and make it all in one? Took one sports psych class and at Sacred Heart, loved it, fell in love. So I was like, I need more. I want to know more.
That's it. I want to interrupt you right there. That's interesting you say that, because I got into this field because I went to the California School of Professional Psychology in San Diego, and we were on 3 14-week trimesters. In my second year, there was a class called sports psychology that I signed up for. There were 8 of us in the class, and 5 minutes into the class, I knew that's what I wanted to do. It just piqued my interest. It's like, because I've been an athlete too, and it's like, wow, this stuff is really cool. I want to get into this. So it sounds like you had the same thing happen to you.
Yes, sir, man. I love to hear that. That's awesome. And I was like, look, I just want more. Like, what can I do with this? Like, adulting question in, like, what am I going to do? How am I going to make money? How am I going to fulfill myself with this? That led me to Springfield College, where I got to study under some sports psych gurus, Dr. Judy Van Rall, Dr. Britt Brewer, and really scratch that itch around, all right, clinical mental health and mental performance. I want to be able to do everything under the sun, one-stop shop essentially. So first is I got to get the master's in athletic counseling. I did that, worked a variety of teams and universities at the Division III level and so on. And then I went on, got more student loans, got my doctorate, stayed at Springfield for my PsyD, where I've really concentrated the bulk of my training in student athlete, the college level, mental health and mental performance, worked at a variety of all sport divisions from D3 to D1, and currently landed at a D1, which so excited and a couple weeks into the role, and it's been awesome.
So, working with college athletes, being an athlete yourself, I want to get into today the whole topic of mental health in college athletes. Now, I co-wrote a book called Just Let Them Play, Guiding Parents, Coaches, and Athletes Through Youth Sports with Kansas City Royals Hall of Famer Jeff Montgomery. And Pete Malone is one of the greatest swim coaches our country's ever had, who coached a number of Olympians, coached for 40 years. I worked with him for 30 years. I worked with Jeff with the Royals. And, you know, college athletes, in my opinion, Matt, are survivors of youth sports. They've survived the craziness that exists today with youth sports, with all these wacko coaches, the emphasis on winning at 6 years of age, parents going crazy, getting in fights at games with other parents and officials and all these types of things. We've had throughout my career, I've had so many people interviewed on this show, and I've worked with so many college athletes too. I work with a whole bunch right now, and I tell everyone in the first session we'll start talking, and I'll say, you survived youth sports, and it's funny, they all smile. And they all say, yeah, I did, because it's crazy. I mean, what do you think about that? Do you agree or disagree with that?
I think that from the youth level, and then for me, really speaking to the college level, the pressure, stressors, and expectations on student athletes, let alone at the college level, at the D1 level, is just so profound. Maybe more now than ever, honestly. And look, you've got social media where the comparison monster is so real. I view as a comparison as a thief of joy a lot of times. So you're going to have comparison with social media. You've got pressures for parents. You got pressures for coaches. You got pressures as a student athlete. Look, COVID ramped up anxiety and stress for everyone. And then student athletes had way more on their plate too. And you're still seeing levels of distress or high levels of stress now as opposed to pre-COVID. So student athletes are under so much pressure. And at the college level, college game, look, they got two full-time jobs as student and as athlete.
Well,
They,
excuse me, I'm going to interrupt you. I think they've got
yeah,
three: student, athlete, and as just a friend, a personal, relationships, because they've got to be the student, they've got to be the athlete, and they've got to have fun too.
absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Look, like you're going to throw on being a human on top of that with emotions, with sadness, with a breakup. I work with like a lot of first-year student athletes. That's just an adjustment to college. They've got everything that a typical college student goes through, and then
And
you have
more.
the athlete piece. 100%, yes. And then I think as the ranks rise and as we see TV coverage, social media, look, it just gets all amplified. So naturally, sport and college athletics is a breeding ground for worsening mental health, which I want to be very clear, normalize that to say, hey, it makes a lot of sense why you got a lot of stress and you got a lot of anxiety for a lot of different folks because look what you got to kind of go through.
So, what are some of the issues that collegiate athletes have presented to you these last few years? Because I see a range of things. Um, you know, Pressure, stress, depression, anxiety all goes together. Um, the social media aspect, which we'll get into as we talk here in a little bit, that's one of the big things. Of course, we're on social media right now, but what I tell all the athletes I work with at the collegiate level and professional level, I talked to two NFL players today. Stay off social media during your season. I had one player that I worked with who was on the Buffalo Bills last year, and he told me, he said, their field goal kicker missed. They kicked playing the Chiefs. I'm from Kansas City, so playing Buffalo in the playoffs, he missed. Tyler Bass missed a field goal
Yeah.
towards the end of the game, would have tied the game. Within 2 days, he was getting death threats on his social media account. He got off all social media. I'm sitting there and think about this. Why in the world would somebody who missed a kick get death threats? Okay, you know, and that's at the professional level. At the collegiate level, it may even be just as bad or worse because the emotions run higher, I think, sometimes for some of these collegiate programs. Let me get your thoughts on that.
Look, that's just it's disgusting that would even happen. And honestly, like I'm a big fan of Pat McAfee's, and when he was at WVU, West Virginia, he missed the kick against Pitt, like big game, and he also got death threats. People like putting notes on his car and stuff, and he openly talks about that. So you see it at all these different levels, and then it gets so amplified. And what I see very similar to you, Doc, is stress, anxiety, and depression. All are the most common things that we see, one amongst college students in general and college student athletes. We're seeing that across the board. That tends to be the most common thing that gets them in the door. And then from there, look, really, it depends. It varies. Most of my career, my work, anecdotally, I've worked with student athletes. It's like sometimes my identity as a sports psychologist in training, or for me now pursuing licensure as a sports psychologist, gets them in the door. And then sometimes you talk about anything but sport. It could be relationship. It could be adjustment to college. It could be academics. It could be family. It could be a past trauma. Or we do a bit of both, like sport performance and more general counseling, clinical mental health things. So really, it's a vary, and I've seen all different spectrum of people coming in with depression, suicidation, to just anecdotally, baseball guys honestly are the ones that usually come in and just want to do mental skills. Is like, hey, I want to really help work on focusing, and we're going to do some imagery and some mindfulness pieces, and that's the main thing we want to focus on, is to get better as a player. But honestly, college, usually they're looking for kind of a one-stop shop or someone that could talk about a range of things. And it really depends.
One of the big issues that I've seen throughout my career, and I've said earlier, if you play collegiate sports, you survive youth sports. But when you get to the collegiate level, you are now on a team of a bunch of high school stars.
Mm-hmm.
You may have been the only star on your high school team. Now everybody who makes it to the team was a star on their team in high school. And so there's the adjustment, number one, of just going to college for any student, just the adjustment of moving out of your home, having to depend on yourself for a lot of things. But as an athlete, when you were the star on your team, as a freshman, you go into a college, you're going to be younger than, say, maybe 4 or 5 years younger than some guys on the team or girls on the team, women on the team. So there's that adjustment of maybe not starting, maybe not playing at all. How do you make that adjustment? Then you have to balance out school, studying, social life, everything else. It can become a real stressor. And we've seen today now with NILs and social media and everything going on, there are no secrets. I mean, everything you do is out in the open. So what are some of the things you've had to confront with some of these young people when you work?
I'm glad you brought up NIL there, because over the past few years, look, a lot of college student athletes are making a lot of money off that, which is great. And I love it. And I'm all for it. And I'm so happy that it's there. And that brings on also a lot of other pressure in there. And then at that point, it's like, what else are we really seeing? Look, mental performance, athlete mental health, it's going to be a range around like big fish in small fish in a big pond. Actually, I was looking for that, is what you're talking about before, Doc. So to get the adjustment coming in, it's like, yeah, you're the star. And then now you're coming into a place where everyone was recruited to be that star. Some people are on scholarships or full scholarships, sometimes not, depending on the school, university. And at the Division I level, a lot of people are on scholarships. So at that point, I'm a big fan of around like kind of ask a question around like dealing with it. It's around normalizing that this is where you were from high school. This is where you are at college. There's a big adjustment there. And from the coaching perspective, having just openness around a defined role and plan for the student athletes is huge. The student athletes are visual, and they like a nice roadmap around like good transparency there too. It's like, okay, what's my role in the team if I'm not starting, or if I'm not playing, which sucks. And you want to play, you want to work at that. But what's my role and where am I to get there? But let's normalize like, hey, it might take a little bit, it might take a lot of different work for you to get there. And here's your defined role from a coaching perspective on here's where you're at, here's the vision for you, and how do we work to best maximize your skill. So kind of it depends based, classic therapy, it depends based on what you're asking, but it's going to, I think there's a lot of those is around role and expectations and normalization of an adjustment.
And to me, that's where the role of the coach comes in.
Mm-hmm.
It's such an important facet of this whole thing, because, you know, I was saying, Matt, a good coach is a good psychologist, a bad coach is a sports psychologist. Good coaches are good communicators. Great coaches are good listeners. And whenever I work with a team, I will always have the athletes as a group come together, and we'll identify several lists. We'll identify the team goals, team strengths, team weaknesses, team fears, team distractions, and team stressors. And then I have everybody individually do all those things. And then what I find out is that with several people, there's some personal stuff going on they need to deal with. And that's where the coaches need to be aware of this stuff. You don't have to tell them everything, but if you've got a depressed athlete on your team who's struggling with the adjustment to make it to college, a coach needs to be aware of that. They shouldn't be oblivious to that, because that's going to help them in terms of their coaching. Because if it's a hard-nosed coach who's really gung-ho and really pushy, and you've got somebody who's struggling with the adjustment, that coach needs to be aware of how they come across, because they could come across in a way that could really devastate that athlete psychologically. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I think intent versus impact is a huge thing that you're talking about. But it comes down to individual communication and coaching points around, look, Billy might need to be coached a little harder. Like he might need a little more of like a rah-rah, a coach in your face a little bit to like kind of push you and to tell you. And Billy's okay with that. And Billy wants to be coach hard. And Billy wants you to kind of give out like pointers in practice and a little bit extra, just like here's what I'm seeing, here's what we need to do here. You name it. But Susie Q, on the other hand, or John Smith, on the other hand, might not want to be coached like that and might need more of a different approach or a different tone or a different way of like just have behind closed doors or at practice, like, hey, you're doing a good job. I need you to work on these things. Hey, but here's the best things I'm thinking for you. I'm a big fan of feedback sandwich, honestly, and coaching and in my life. So I'm a big fan of here's your strengths and here's your areas of growth. I'm all in the service of you working to get better. I think a lot of times coaching wise, that goes a long way in that open communication for student athletes. But it's acknowledging like, look, everyone has a different way that they're coached and a different communication type of style. And it's about, you're talking about, Doc, is work to figure out your team. Who needs what? Who's going to perform best at what? And we're talking about individual performance here too. Like, look, maybe the kicker, like for example, this is just stereotype, but like maybe needs to hang off and not kind of be in the rah-rah huddle before he makes a field goal, where the middle linebacker might need to do that actually a bit more and to get rah-rahed up and to hype himself up before he goes into play. Just some stereotypes, but we're talking about the individual performance for student athletes and what's going to get them there, what's kind of their zone of optimal performance there. And we're getting to the communication style of, okay, this is how I'm going to coach you. This is what I know about you as a human and as an athlete. How do I get the best out of you?
My first job was at the University of Kansas with the men's and women's track and cross country teams. Bob Timmons, the men's coach, Carla Coffey, the women's coach, hired me. And this is how far things have come. It was $5 a day, 1 day a week up at the University of Kansas. It was 40 miles away from where I am. But it was a great opportunity for me to get started. And those coaches were great, as well as their assistant coaches. Steve Kiefer was the assistant coach, a great guy. Roger Bowen, another one, and Theo Hamilton on the women's side. They allowed me to work with the athletes, but to also, with the athletes' permission, talk about some of the issues that were going. Because we had, you got a track and field team, a cross country team. There are a lot of people on that team, and some people had certain issues, some didn't. But the coaches were open, and as we got to know each other, wanted my feedback on what's going on with this young man or young lady. How can I help them out? They were great with that. Then I've been with professional teams where we've had some incredible coaches. Rick Ben was a soccer coach that I worked with for years here in Kansas City. John Watson was the manager of Kansas City Royals in 1990. Trey Hillman was the manager in 2008 when I got rehired by the Royals. They wanted to know what they could do to help the players out. Then they've been replaced by some other managers who, quite frankly, weren't as interested. But the fact of the matter is, I've been with teams where there've been the coaches that had allowed me to be there. They wanted the assistance with that. And I think that's where the communication aspect at the collegiate level is so important, with I think with someone in your role to work with the team, but to have the freedom to take an athlete into the coach's office and say, listen, this young lady is depressed. You need to be aware of what's going on. We're going to work on some things. I want her to share with you, maybe not everything, but just basically a generic explanation of what's happening so the coach understands. Because if they don't share that, coach doesn't know it, how they coach them could be really detrimental to their performance and well-being.
One of the great things about my role being embedded is working with all the different other people at large. So as part of like the performance teams, so I'm together with athletic training, sports medicine, nutrition, academic services. And I sit on all these meetings together with also the coaching staff where we're all working together, and data analytics too. We got all that in there. 21st century true on. And we're all working and the best possibly serve the student athletes. And what can we do for that? So a lot of the role is just hearing from all different folks around, what are you seeing? What are you noticing? And from the coaching perspective too, like, what are you seeing? What are you noticing? And for others to give that feedback also. For sports psych, it's different because of confidentiality, whether we can't deny nor confirm that we know of someone that's coming to work with us or not, unless we got a release of information in place. So a lot of the meetings is kind of me taking a back seat and just listening and observing and gathering the information. But we're all in proper, when the proper channels are crossed and the proper releases are there, we're all communicating the best we want to for the student athletes, and to be on the same page. Is sometimes it's just letting the coach know, like, hey, John Smith is going through something right now. We have permission as a heads up just to give you a little bit of that. And it's coming to that. Like, student athletes are also asked for mental health days at points. We got policies and procedures to address that and best serve the student athletes and the coaching staffs. So when you have the embedded piece and we work together hand in hand with everyone, it makes a world of difference.
Okay, with your role now at a D1 school that's a prominent school, what do you see as the major stressors that a lot of these young people are dealing with today? I mean, I could go a lot of different directions, but I want to get your perspective on that.
Sure. I mean, we covered social media already a whole lot. We covered the comparison monster in there with different friends and teammates. And I think, just to circle back to it, just being, they'll have those 3 full-time jobs, as we talked about before: student, athlete, person. I mean, that's the biggest one, is like they've got all this that they're trying to solve and figure out. And here's all these different stakeholders of parents and administrators and coaches that are oftentimes like best trying to serve the student athletes and support them, but yet intrinsically just there's pressure there. Like, okay, I want to make parents proud. I want to leave a legacy here. Student athletes, especially college level D1, are big into leaving legacy of how do I perform my best. I want to maximize these 4, 5, 6 years, whatever it is. And then I'm trying to navigate friendships and relationships in my classroom, and then I'm trying to perform my best in the field. It's a lot. If we haven't covered it already, it's a lot. So it's hard to say exactly.
No,
go ahead. Sorry.
No, so what I'm hearing from you, this is the word that pops in my mind: expectations.
Yes.
Expectations from a wide array of people and areas. And something I talk with all the time, like I've got a very prominent NFL player that I worked with on the Kansas City Chiefs. And one of the things we talk about is what's expected of him when he's playing, and how does he deal with things if he messes up or makes a mistake. Because everything, this is a man who's been on 3 Super Bowl teams now and has been a very prominent part of it. But, if he makes a mistake, everybody sees it. So how you adjust to that, how you react to that at the collegiate level, he's learned to deal with that. He's older, but at the same time, at the collegiate level, you've got kids who haven't had to deal with that as much. And so the pressure is immense and enormous for them to come into this worldwide viewing area. High school, a lot of people aren't going to see what you do, but you get to collegiate level, especially the big time college programs, everybody sees everything you do positively or negatively. So the expectations on you are enormous. So that to me is one of the things I deal with. Do you agree with that? And how do you handle that when they feel they're not living up to the expectations placed on them?
Absolutely. Certainly see that. And we're talking a lot of this is around the outcome basis, and that's very much into fixed mindset. I'm a big fan of growth mindset, and let's look at the process to help you get those results. And let's also brace for, look, mistakes are going to happen. We all know this. We all have some adversity that we go through. Everyone has it. As a student athlete, it's going to happen. So let's normalize that and let's brace for that. And then let's talk about, like for baseball, I'm a big fan of quality at bats. Okay, let's give you a quality at bat instead of the outcome. What's the process here of working to get better?
Exactly.
If that's trickled down from coaches and student athletes alike within a culture, I think that's so huge.
Yeah, I quality ABs. I mean, I've dealt with Major League Baseball players. One guy who won a batting title. I mean, that's what we talk about is quality at bats. How do you accomplish quality at bat? And it's not about necessarily getting a hit, but did you battle? Did you foul off 7 pitches? Did you know maybe you got a single up the middle? Okay, whatever it might be. Maybe you had several line drive outs in a row. Those are quality at bats because you hit the ball hard. You can't do anything about it after you hit it, but it's about quality. Yeah, and that's a big thing. And so the collegiate level, how we define quality is so important because at the high as kids get older, that definition becomes more materialistic. At quality at younger ages is having fun, going and playing. As you get to middle school, high school, the results start to get into play. When you get to the collegiate level, unfortunately, the results matter sometimes more than they should, which can result in if you're not accomplishing those goals, the depression, the stress, the anxiety kicks in. And that's where I think, as I said earlier, a good coach is a good psychologist. A great coach is great coaches are good psychologists. And because they understand where an athlete's struggling, and instead of being hard on them, they're going to be supportive and help them get through that. That's what coaching to me is about.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And unmet expectations oftentimes breed a lot of those mental health concerns that you're talking about here, Doc. And that's individual, and that also can be from a team or teammate perspective too. So I'm a big fan of around, okay, individually within your process, what is quality here, or what is productive in terms of serving you to be the best possible player? If you didn't score a touchdown, you didn't hit a home run, because just society in general, we're very outcome based. Student athletes work their whole lives to get to the point to play in college at a D1 level, if that's where they're playing at. So it's all based on outcomes. And a lot of people like fast, quick, okay, show me the outcomes, show me the result. But we got to get there. And I think when we're able to define that within the culture and we talk about that individually and then as a team, what is quality for your team? What's a growth mindset of like what's productive for your team? If you didn't win, let's go through the wins here and then let's talk about how we get better. Same thing individually. If you didn't make the game-winning shot, or you didn't have a lot of assists or a lot of shots on goal or a lot of catches or whatever it is for your individual sport, what is for you makes sense in terms of I'm working to get better, I'm within the culture of myself and the team, and how do I do that and improve? Because negativity bias is so real. Look, those negatives and my classic example is like you can get 9 90s in a row on a chem test. But what's probably going to stick in your craw is that 160 probably. But how do we take like the 990s and make that the forefront of where you're at and remind you of those? I think that negativity bias goes within everything we're talking about here and working through a lot of this.
Well, man, that's where you hit on something that I emphasize with all the athletes. I have one of the Chiefs Super Bowl jerseys framed in my office, and this young man wrote the letters FOE on there. FOE stands for focus on effort, because I talk about focus on effort versus focus on results, fo versus for. When you're focusing on results, you're thinking about numbers, times, all those types of things. But how do you get those? By the effort that puts you in to get there. And that's why everybody I work with, I try to emphasize that. I've had some even write it on their hands, on their gloves, on their batting. FOE, effort, effort, effort. So if the effort's there, you have a greater chance for results. So to wrap things up, let me ask this question: what do you feel is from a mental health perspective, perhaps the biggest obstacle stressor for athletes today at the collegiate level?
Ooh, great question. I still think stigma is real, and a lot of student athletes, some will be like wave across the campus at their therapists, and some will be like, I don't want anyone to see me. I don't want coaches. I don't want teammates. I want anyone to know, which makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of fear around like losing playing time or being seen as weak or not mentally tough. You name it, that stigma is there. So that in combination with all those pressures we're talking about, we see that look, most student athletes will report they go through something mental health wise. Like it's more common that people will report they go through mental health concerns than they'll actually seek out help for those concerns. That's where it lies of we as the clinicians and then honestly as like sport fans and coaches and people who work in sport keep emphasizing no, please go see someone before it even gets worse if you're going through something mental health wise. Let's get you in the door. You have people that care about you, that want you to do well, that want to support you, or they're trained for that. That's the biggest thing I see around stigma. And it's still so prevalent, unfortunately. It's getting better thanks to a lot of different, like the Olympics, like Tom Brady, Kevin Love, good amount of people who are advocating. But that's where it is of let's keep giving the information out there. Let's keep giving the education and the importance of working on your mental health and addressing it when something arises for you, because we're people. We all go through something.
Well, in relation to that, just to tie in with my 44th year of work, when I moved back home from San Diego to Kansas City, I stopped at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs to interview. Uh, Bob Nodded, my professor, set up an interview for me. And the assistant head of sports medicine met with me for about 15, 20 minutes and said, thanks for coming, but we don't need any of you PhD people around here telling us what's wrong with our athletes. That was 1981 in August. And then I got hired the following June by U.S. Cycling Federation as their team psychologist because they got my name from that individual. I worked with them through 1988 and 84, won 9 medals in the Olympics, had won any in 72 years. And the mental aspect became a big part of that. And now, of course, we're seeing, I was one of, I think there were 5 sports psychologists officially with teams at the 84 Olympics. Now, of course, everybody has one, the Olympic program. And I think at the collegiate level, the professional level, we're seeing an explosion of people recognizing the importance of this. So I want to wish you the best of luck in your work at the college you're working at. I want to thank you. If Matt, how people want to get a hold of you, how can they reach you? Because you've got a good message to share, and I'd like people to be able to contact you.
Oh, I really appreciate it, Doc. Love the conversation today. People can find me on Instagram. My professional Instagram is SportPsychMatt. Nothing in there, just SportPsychMatt. That's it as a title. Or they could reach out to me over email at M and their last name Monaco, Monaco at springfieldcollege.edu.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has been a great interview, and I'm sure some people are going to get a hold of you because you've got some good skills here to share with people that are going to help people out. So thanks for being with me.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciated it.
Well, if you've enjoyed our show, go to my website, winnersunlimited.com. Click on the podcast tab to listen to episodes of the show. You know, I've got several years of podcasts on there, close to 10 years. My radio show is at Sports Radio 810 WHB here in Kansas City. I'm on every Sunday morning from 7 to 8 a.m. It's 810-810 WHB.com. My website's winnersunlimited.com, and you can always reach me there at drj@winnersunlimited.com.